eyes has feathers. Flap. Okay, I can't fly like Doflamingo can. Sorry. So, this video is obviously going to be, considering that I pulled out my feathered boa, and I'm going to talk about One Piece. And I'm not going to actually talk about Boa Hancock, which I haven't really done any videos about her, but I don't care. Well, I talked about her and her sisters on the Sisters Day one, but that's different. This video is going to be another one that kind of centers around the Doflamingo family, the Don Quixote family, as in the celestial dragon part of this, that is Homing and his wife, and, you know, to a degree, Rocinante and Doflamingo. Take these glasses off, because they just make everything very red, and that doesn't work for if I have to read my notes. That doesn't work very well. This is kind of just a theory video that I kind of thought up the other day, that I'm just like, when I was doing my research for the Royal Monkeys video that I did about the concept about like Luffy and his family, about him and his father and his grandfather all being like descendant from like a branch of a celestial dragon family that like left Marie-Joie several generations ago. That different video. This theory came along in the fact that when I was looking up information about, like, you know, the other celestial dragons that we know that have left Marie-Joie, the main one, of course, that we know about, technically the only ones that we know about are Homing and his wife, and then their two sons, Doflamingo and Rocinante. And I kind of had the thought of, well, obviously something that Homing learned or found out, or just kind of, you know, had an epiphany about, resulted in him wanting to leave Marie-Joie. And him wanting to leave Marie-Joie and go and live in the quote-unquote lower realm. Fuzz. Dog hair. More dog hair. Vader has dog hair all over him. And one of the things that I kind of had pop into my head was the concept of, well, the only other celestial dragons that we know about to a degree, you know, up to that point, that had really any knowledge of what was going on in the lower realm were the Gorosei. Im-sama to a degree, but we don't exactly know how long this particular Im-sama has reigned, or if this Im-sama is the same one that is, you know, maybe has been in power all the way back to, you know, the Void Century. We're not sure. But we know of the Gorosei, and they tend to be pretty up to date on the goings-on and the happenings down in the lower realm, with pirates, with marines, with other countries, with the revolutionaries, with Yonko, with everything like that. They seem to be pretty up to date with these things. You know, they have an idea of like different pirates that come into play, like they kind of know who Luffy is, and things like that. And I was kind of having the thought of, well, Homing obviously had some form of epiphany that resulted in him making him want to leave Marie-Joie. And my thought was, well, what if Homing had been being trained to become a Gorosei? Or what if he'd been one of the ones chosen to kind of maybe be the next one? Now, since we don't know the exact process for how they choose the Gorosei, we don't know exactly like if it's like it's like once you're a Gorosei, you're a Gorosei for life, kind of like a Supreme Court judge or something like that, or if it's like, oh, you're a Gorosei until either like you retire, or maybe Im-sama becomes displeased with you, or the other four of the Gorosei become displeased with you, and maybe you're like kicked out or forcibly retired, or possibly killed, depending on stuff. But it's this constant, you know, we don't really know the exact method for like how they choose the next Gorosei. And given the fact that, you know, Homing, I don't think we see any of the Gorosei specifically during the Doflamingo's flashback where we find out about his family and everything. I don't know if we see any of the Gorosei specifically during that time frame. So we don't know if maybe it was still the same 5 Gorosei that we've seen that we still don't know names of, but the same 5 that we've seen the entire time, all the way through so far, or if these are a different set of Gorosei, or maybe like 2 or 3 of them are the same ones, and maybe since then, like the youngest one with the blonde hair, like maybe he wasn't a Gorosei yet, maybe there was a different one that was in there, and maybe since then that Gorosei had died, and maybe it's like each of the Gorosei kind of like picks their successor, or like picks like 1 or 2 options to be their successor, and then like when they get close to dying or retiring or something like that, they start training their said successors, and then like when they die or they retire, so then they then they like let Im-sama pick between their different successors and say, this one may become the next Gorosei, and you are still backup in case like one of these other ones die or something like that. Because, we don't know exactly how long you stay a Gorosei. It doesn't seem to be because I think the whole time that we've seen the Gorosei, like even back to, I think the earliest I think that we've seen them is like the 20 years ago when we get like the flashback to Ohara, when Clover is talking to them over the Den Mushi. Now, I don't know if we actually clearly saw their faces, but obviously we've only seen the main 5. And then very recently we were introduced to Im-sama. And my thought for as to why maybe Homing had been a Gorosei, or been like being trained to become a Gorosei, was he obviously had this like epiphany of like, maybe I shouldn't be a celestial dragon, maybe I am actually human and not this like holy sanctified figure that should be like worshipped by everyone that's around me, that's below me. And like maybe I shouldn't have slaves and everything like that. And we've also seen Milzigard go through this same thing where he's had this kind of epiphany because of Otohime. But he decided to, of course, stay a celestial dragon. But my thought was that, so via the timelines of this, Homing and his family left Marie Joie 33 years ago, if I remember correctly, and then of course they, left, and like the other celestial dragons kind of tried to like beg them to stay. It's like, Homing, well, not beg them to stay, but like, Homing, what is wrong with you? Why do you want to leave here? We're celestial dragons. We're supposed to be here. We live above everybody else. That is literally what we do. We can do whatever we want. And Homing is just like very calm, and like he's just like, yeah, but I don't feel like this is like where I belong, or something along those lines. He's like, I feel like I don't feel like a god. I feel like I'm supposed to be human. And then of course him and his wife and sons leave, and then of course they have their big mansion, and then they blab to the villagers that they're celestial dragons, former celestial dragons, and then they basically get, crucified, and the mom dies, and they get tortured, and then eventually, Doflamingo kills his father, because reasons, and he's not right in the head at the time. Well, caveat, Doflamingo did literally just lose his mother. He's been kicked out of the place that he's lived his entire life in regards to being a celestial dragon, and then kicked into this new situation without any, concept as to why we're here and, what's going on. And then he's literally given this devil fruit and a gun by Treble after him and his father and his brother have gone through this extremely traumatic experience in regards to them being crucified. And then his conqueror's Haki awakens. And then, we assume that he has all these, scars around his eyes and everything like that. From when him and his father and brother were tortured. And then he's just, eventually, he just kind of snaps, and that's what happens with, when he kills Homing. And then, he's kind of convinced himself, or Treble said something along the lines of, oh, well, if you kill your father and take his head back to Marie Joie, then maybe they'll accept you back. And then you can bring us, the ones that become the first 4 executives, bring us with you when you return to Marijois. We know that this doesn't happen. He still tries to take his father's head back, which is still a disturbing thing, and I'm actually slightly glad they didn't show it in the manga or the anime. But he tried to take his father's head back, and then of course that's just, they say no, and they still, they kind of kick him out, but they try to capture him first because they assume that maybe he knows something. And that's the other thing that kind of makes me think that Homing knew more than the average celestial dragon, is because of the fact that Doflamingo knew something that the Gorosei didn't want getting out. Now, as the reader, as the fan base, we're kind of assumed to believe that this is something to do with a secret involving Joy Boy or the Void Century or something along those lines, something regarding the One Piece or the Poneglyphs or the Ancient Kingdom, or involving the Will of D. And, we know, of course, that, Doflamingo still wants to be kept up to date on, what's going on in the world, because Doflamingo literally is just kind of the concept of, if I can't have the world, I just want to watch it burn type of thing. Okay. And, that's the way that Doflamingo works. And he makes the comment when he's in, he's still at the moment, as far as we're aware, he's still in Impel down on level 6. Possibly still being personally guarded by Magellan. Because when we cut there, I think it is during one of the Reverie arcs that we see when they cut to Impel down with Doflamingo, and he's still chained in the cell and everything, and he's been requested that they bring him a paper once a week or something like that so he can keep an eye on what's going on in the world. And apparently they're just okay, well, that's a reasonable request. We'll bring you a paper every week, and here are your glasses back. We'll at least give you some dignity with that. But he's obviously keeping up to date with what's going on, because he keeps laughing when he kind of reads about what Luffy did in Totland, I think is what he reads about. And then he's probably laughing about whatever happened with Sabo at the Reverie. Again, we don't know exactly what happened, but that seems to be something that he finds amusing. Then again, Sabo did just kind of basically help, take down him and his, empire. So, yeah. And one of the things that we see happen in regards to this is he also mentions that, when he's talking to Magellan, he says you think, there's someone that's trying to break into Impel Down and trying to get to me, and that's why you're here, because they're going to send someone to assassinate me because of the thing that I know. Now, considering the fact that Doflamingo really likes to talk, but he also just likes to mess with people, he could be either A, just trying to mess with Magellan, or B, because he's Doflamingo and he's just screw it, I'll just see what I can do now. That'll be fun and entertaining for me. And he's okay, well, there's this thing that I know, and there could legitimately be something that he knows, considering that he was this, information broker and everything like that. I would assume that there is something that he does legitimately know, and that eventually we will find out what this thing is. As I said, it could relate to Joy Boy or the Void Century or the One Piece or the Will of D, or something to do with Im Sama himself. That's what I'm thinking, is that the world as a whole, minus the Gorosei and maybe a couple of specific servants, they don't know that Im Sama exists, because of course there's this whole thing, this whole mythos and show of force with the fact of this is the empty throne on top of the world at the exact center of Pangea Castle, on the exact center of where the red line and the grand line in your cross and everything. This throne has sat here for 800 years or whatever, and it will stay empty because this world has no one king. It is ruled by the world government, and all the 20 king swords, and then since then all the other swords and everything that are there. And of course, just kind of as the reader, you're just giant empty throne, big deal made out of it. Someone's gonna sit on that throne. and they're going to be very important to this story. And of course, within like the chapter or two after we're introduced to the empty throne, we are introduced to Im-sama, and that he is this, ruler, true ruler of the world. My thought is that when Homing was growing up, he may have demonstrated at least enough of an intelligence, enough of a something to differentiate him from the other celestial dragons that ended up being more like, Charlos and, some of the other ones that just didn't, they just wanted to like torture the slaves and everything. Maybe he, showed off this interest in like at least wanting to know some about the lower realm. And that may have been something that like caught the eye of the Gorosei, and maybe it's, maybe as a young celestial dragon, grows up, maybe the Gorosei like keeps an eye on them or so, or like maybe they have like certain, other people that they use to keep an eye on, the children of the celestial dragons. Because I would assume that in Marie-Joie there is like some form of a school, and that, that's where the celestial dragons' children go to. And, they are at least somewhat educated, maybe at least taught to read and write and everything like that. And at least taught somewhat of like the history of the world, the very, very stark history of like your ancestors founded the world government after there was this great war. And now, you and the other, 18 families, your family and the other 18 families that are here are descendants of those founders. And like, that makes you better than everybody else. And, maybe they, the rest of the celestial dragons probably at least know that the Gorosei exist. But I doubt the rest of the celestial dragons know that Im-sama exists. And it might be that, as a celestial dragon grows up, if they seem to demonstrate any form of this specific or like any interest in like the lower realm, beyond just like, oh, I want a slave that's a mermaid, or that's a fishman, or that's like, a long neck or a long leg, or a snake neck or a long arm or a long leg, or I want a giant servant or whatever. That, maybe they're, kept an eye on, like they have someone that keeps an eye on them. And then like when they get maybe to like a teenager or something like that, then maybe it's, they kind of gather up some of the ones that seem to show this interest, or seem to show at least a higher level of the ability to comprehend more details and, more ideas than just, ooh, I want a pretty fish girl so I can feed her to the piranhas. Because I highly doubt that Roswald was a whole lot different than Charlos when he was growing up. Although at the very least, Roswald does seem to be at least somewhat smarter than Roswald. Not by much, than Charlos, but not by much. But what kind of is my thought from that is that Homing was maybe one of these, young celestial dragons that had this, interest in, the lower realm. Maybe he seemed to be at least somewhat smarter than the other celestial dragons, the other younger ones at that point in time. And maybe like when he became a teenager, maybe like he started to get a little bit more, education about the lower realm. Still like kind of the propaganded version of like, as the celestial dragon, you're still better than all these other people. You're still above the kings and the queens and everything like that. Maybe they started to pay a little bit more attention to what goes on at Reverie and things like that. Whenever the Reverie would happen. Now, we don't know exactly how old Homing was when they left Marie-Joie. We know that they left 33 years ago, if I remember correctly, but we never get an exact age of Homing. And given the fact that, like, I think Doflamingo is supposed to be, I want to say, like, 8 to 10 range when they leave, that Homing, I would say, at least is in his late 20s to early 30s when he leaves. But I don't know we don't know an exact age on him. So what I would assume happened is he goes through like this training and he learns more. And then like maybe it was getting close to time for like one of the other celestial dragons to retire, or, something along those lines. And like maybe they had several candidates picked out, and like maybe it was that, oh, they did choose one. And it wasn't Homing. Maybe it was like they noticed that Homing seemed a bit too kind for what they wanted. He was smart, or well, he was at least, somewhat smart, but he was a bit too kind. And, maybe at this point in time, they've learned a little bit more about, like, not the true history, but a little bit more of the history of Marie-Joie. And maybe it was like, the new Gorosei was picked. Probably not the youngest blonde one, because he actually kind of looks like he might have been younger than Homing. But, maybe it was one of the other ones that had gotten picked out of Homing's batch. And maybe, like, Homing was still, like, this kind of, like, a standby option, depending on stuff. And maybe they tried to, like, enforce a little bit more, like, maybe try to get a little bit of the nice out of him. And maybe that just didn't work. Maybe he still, had, more training under the other, Gorosei to a degree. And maybe it just didn't work, and he just, like, he still learned some stuff that, like, most of the celestial dragons didn't learn, but he just eventually decided that, like, he's like, well, maybe I won't become a Gorosei, but maybe I can do more good in the world, even if I'm not a Gorosei, if I go and live among the people. And then, of course, that's when he makes his decision to leave, take his wife and his sons, and they head down to, the lower realm. And he's just like, he's considered crazy by the rest of the celestial dragons, particularly, most of the other, just the everyday celestial dragons. And then, like, the Gorosei probably just, like, look down upon him. It's like, maybe there's more of a spite there. Like, maybe not the same level of spite that goes with the way that they feel about the Nefeltari family, like Vivi's family, but at least this level of spite that is... We put so much work into trying to train him, and here's what he does. He decides that he'd rather go and live in the lower realm, among the mortals, among the trash of the earth. He'd rather go and live there than live here with us. Well, I guess that's what'll happen. He's not our problem anymore. And that's basically reiterated. The concept of Homing not being their problem anymore is reiterated in the fact that when, after, like, the initial stuff happens where they're found out to be celestial dragons, and, like, when the wife, like, probably just before the wife gets sick, that he tries to call the world government, called the world nobles, and be like, please, just let us come back. I'm sorry. At least take my wife and sons back. I'm sorry. Just, let me get punished, but take them back and everything. And it's basically just like, no, you made your decision. You're scum now. You can go and live with the rest of the scum and you'll get whatever you deserve, is basically what we see happen with that. And I can kind of see, and like, he at least wanted to do something to protect his family, but unfortunately that didn't come to fruition. But my other thought is that obviously at some point Doflamingo learned something either from his father or when he was in Marie Joie, something along those lines. Because I can tell you this, if there is this process that you have to go through to become a Gorosei, to become like one of these selected members, considering how high of an intelligence level and a manipulative level that we've seen that Doflamingo can pull off with everything that he's done and his planning and everything like that, I can definitely kind of assume that had Homing and his sons and his wife stayed in Marie Joie, that maybe Doflamingo wouldn't have activated his Conqueror's Haki, but maybe he would have caught the eye of the other Gorosei. And it's like, well, Homing didn't turn out to be really, as hopeful of a prospect into becoming a Gorosei as we thought. But maybe his son might. And it may have ended up being that Doflamingo would have, been raised to become a Gorosei. And then he would have eventually become, one of the Gorosei when one of the other ones died. And depending on how manipulative Doflamingo was, he probably would have found a way to kill one of the Gorosei and then take their spot. Ensure that he would be the one chosen to be the next Gorosei. Give or take. Or he could have just ended up being like a, fat blonde version of Charlos, as a lot of people have done in memes, which is just funny. That would have been funny. But the other thing that I want to tack on here that I kind of thought of a minute ago is that Homing was a celestial dragon during the same time that God's Valley took place. When, Roger and Garp and, Rox and his crew had this huge battle on God Valley. And, Homing was a celestial dragon at the time, and both Doflamingo and Rocinante would have been born at this point in time already. And there's always this possibility, because like we kind of think that like, oh, God's Valley was maybe this place where like the celestial dragons went, that wasn't in Marie Joie, that was this other valley, this like island that they could go to, that was, this kind of a sanctuary on Earth that they could go to, that maybe had been like deemed as like, oh, this is another place where the celestial dragons can go. It's more holy ground, something along those lines. And maybe it was like they could like not have to have like their stupid bubble heads when they were down there, because it's just like, oh, this is also like holy ground type of a thing, so it's okay. And like, so we see that, or like you can kind of picture that, and maybe what had happened, maybe not necessarily that like Homing was there when it happened, but maybe he heard about what happened. Because I would assume even at that time that at least something with happening would have been like said to the rest of the world, like maybe not like 100% explained, like obviously not that like Garth and Roger worked together, but like something may have been told to the world of like, oh, well, God's Valley has vanished, and maybe like, maybe Homing learned about that, and then maybe he did some research and maybe figured out what had happened. And my thought is that like maybe eventually he may have told something to Doflamingo and Rocinante before he was killed. Probably more Doflamingo, because Rocinante may not have, at least maybe not been able to comprehend it, because he was at least old enough to kind of understand what happened. But maybe Dofi was a little bit more interested in that, and he had more of this interest in trying to learn information about what his father knew. And that may have been the case. It may have been like Homing maybe told him something, maybe not about Im Sama specifically, but maybe he learned like, oh, well, I had been one of the ones chosen to possibly become a Gorosei, and maybe he told Doflamingo some about that, and about some of the training that he went through, learn more about the world and everything like that. And instead of it being that like Homing having this thing like the other celestial dragons or like the other Gorosei, where they just have this like contempt for the rest of the world, it's like it's there for our amusement. They're chess pieces for us to play with and for Im Sama to play with. And yes, maybe some of the chess pieces get a little threatening at times, kind of like Dragon, but in actuality, it's not really that big of a problem. We can handle it easily. And it may have been, but Homing just had this opposite effect, this opposite reaction to it, where he's just like well, if there are these people that are starving or homeless or something like that, why don't we help them? We have all of this money, all of this gold. Why don't we just, help them with it? And it may have just been like kind of the last straw, and he may have been kicked out of the Gorosei training program. It was like, oh God, this guy has a conscience. Get him out of here. Then like they kicked him out, and then like maybe eventually it was like that's when he decided to leave and take his family with him. And then like, yeah, eventually he told Doflamingo something, and then like the Gorosei are just worried that Doflamingo knows something that he learned from his father, and that's one of the reasons why they want to capture him, why they wanted him dead, why like he had this information, why they were like a little more willing to make him a warlord and everything like that, when he held their gold hostage and everything, kind of like the whole like, I'll give you your gold and I won't tell the world your little secret, whatever that little secret was. Something, blah, 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 Joe Boy, Void Century, Im Sama, whatever. We don't know. And eventually it will come around. Well, hopefully we'll find out what the secret is from Doflamingo. Maybe he'll just get so bored in that cell. Like he'll read the paper, and like he'll find out that, oh, Straw Hat Luffy toppled Kaido. And him and, several of the other worst generation pirates together managed to defeat Kaido and Big Mom. And, Wano was freed, and now he's claimed Wano as his territory. And Big Mom has retreated back to, Totland or whatever. And then there was this giant elephant that showed up. And like, it's just like that whole concept. And then like, maybe Doflamingo is just like, maybe he'll either get really bored or just really entertained, and he'll just be like, huh. I can use this. And then, like, maybe he'll just, like, tell Magellan something. And Magellan will just be like oh, good, where are you? Wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Like, Magellan just like, wait, hold on. That giant chair actually has someone that sits in it? I've been lied to. And then Magellan just finds a prison break. No. No, I don't see that happening. But I can see either, like, Doflamingo either somehow gets his way out of, Impel Down, and then, like, he makes this revelation to the rest of the world of just, like, oh, there was this thing that happens, or, like, he shows up at, like, Laugh Tale somehow. I have no idea how he'd get there. Well, as long as there are clouds, it's not like he can't jump from, like, cloud to cloud with his strings and eventually find his way there and, like, stop off at other islands on the way. And then, like, eventually just, like, find his way there. If I had Doflamingo's powers, it's like, okay, well, obviously I have to find a way around Totland and Wano to get to this other side where possibly the One Piece is. And, like, I would literally just, like, start at, like, the red line where, like, the red line and the grand line meet again, and then just, like, work my way. Just, like, grid pattern search my way through that area to try to find Laugh Tale. That would be funny. It's like, particularly if you're Doflamingo, where you can just, like, jump into the sky, and, like, as long as there are clouds, you can, like, jump from cloud to cloud with your string powers. I would do that. That would work. I'd still have, like, a ship waiting for me to, like, go and land on if I got tired or something like that. It's just like, okay, I'm done searching for the day. Time to go to sleep. Okay, back up. Time to keep searching. Maybe, I don't know. But I can see Doflamingo. This one from Homing was a Gorosei video too. What does Doflamingo know? But, like, with Doflamingo, it's like something we'll probably eventually learn what that secret is. And it might be something that leads back to his dad. Something his father told him, and maybe we'll get, like, a little bit more of a flashback of Homing or something along those lines, because Doflamingo had to learn that tidbit somehow, and it doesn't seem like something they're just going to teach to all of the celestial dragons, whatever it was. It's a big enough secret that probably not taught to everyone, and it may have only been taught to either the Gorosei themselves or people who were being, groomed to become the Gorosei. And, like, maybe they just looked at Homing as a failure, and then that's why they let him leave. And, and then didn't even try to bring him back. They didn't think that he would tell his son, and then, like, maybe when Dofi was there, when he brought back Homing's head, during that time frame, maybe it was, like, he said something that, like, confirmed that he knew about whatever the secret was, that he knew whatever the secret was that his father told him, and, like, now they're just like, we have to catch him. I don't know. Maybe that'll be the case. We'll find out. I highly doubt there'll ever be, like, confirmation that, like, Homing was a celestial dragon. We knew this. Whether or not Homing was a Gorosei. But we'll see what happens. I also technically have, like, another video in mind that involves Vivi. But it's not like her being a Gorosei video, because that would be kind of stupid, because she wouldn't be a Gorosei. Although we don't know if females can be a Gorosei, since we've never seen that. There might be, like, another flashback at some point where we get, like, other Gorosei members shown, and maybe one of them will be female. Oda does have that proclivity of at least having one female in a lot of his groups. There's Bonnie in the Supernovas, there's Big Mom in the Yonko, there's Boa in the Warlords. We haven't really seen that many female celestial dragons. Most of the ones we've seen have been male. But there was Charlotte's sister, and then, of course, there's, Homing's wife. But there seems to be at least, like, one token female in a lot of these things. And there's, like, Suru, who's kind of, like, the token, female member of, like, the admiral level stuff, minus the actual admirals, because we haven't seen a female admiral yet, unless Fujitora is confirmed to be, not Fujitora. Ryokogu with Green Bull is confirmed to be female, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Or I could be wrong, and they may reveal that. And of course, even among, like, the 9 red scabbards, you have, Kiku, who's, the Kikunoja, who's, like, the female at heart and everything like that. So maybe there'll be, like, another flashback where we get to see, like, a different group of the Gorosei, and maybe one of them will be female, and it may have just been, like, the last one that died was female, and then like maybe the next, maybe that was when like the youngest one with the blonde hair was brought in, and then maybe he was like her son or something like that. I don't know, but that's what we have. So I thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I brought out the Vader shirt because it's Vader, and I also just kind of thought that, I'm talking about a corrupt governmental system with one guy at the head of it, and then he has all of these lackeys. So Vader. So I thank you very much for watching. I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. This is the life you have chosen. The discarded cannot be reclaimed. Do not dare to call upon us again, you filthy human.